Dr. Mark Jangizi here with your Science Moment. Your experience right now with the world is not that of a passive receiver. Your brain is actively creating all of these perceptions that you see. It's not a projection of the world onto you. No, you're actively creating it right now, all the time as we speak. So I'm going to talk about that briefly today. Before I do, again, I want to remind you, go get a copy of Expressly Human. It comes out next week. You can get signed copies if you go to freex.group, to our Free Expression Institute. Go to Up to Expression. You can get yourself signed copies. We appreciate your support. We need your support to get this, the origins of emotional expressions out and what masks cover over. So this sort of comes up by virtue of a couple things that I've been talking about recently. One, I talked about the origins of music, and I focused just on a separate side of it, which concerns the fact that when you listen to music, you are not just passively listening. Once you get to know the music, you are actively singing it in your head. You are singing in time with it, without delay. You are in time with the music, and it feels quite fundamentally different when that's the case. And then last Science Moment episode, I talked about why we see perceptual illusions. And this concerns your brain's attempt to correct for the delay in your brain. Light hits your eye, there's a delay, and then a perception occurs, because it takes a while for a perception to occur. And it turns out that compensating for that delay and creating a perception of what the world will be like by the time your perception occurs can explain why we see geometrical illusions and all of these other illusions. But there's another side of that. Once you realize there's a delay and you're creating a perception of the future, well, that tells you that you're not just passively being shown what the world looks like by the projector of the universe or whatever onto our eye. No, you're never seeing that. You're seeing, your actual perceptual awareness is your own internal attempt that you evolved to have to anticipate what the world will be like in 100 milliseconds or a tenth of a second. You are seeing the near future, which of course is the present by the time the perception occurs. You're seeing that perception, but that shows you that that perception was created by you. It's not just being shown and passively pushed upon you. And in fact, it's not merely the case that, well, we have some inevitable delays, and so we're stuck with that, and we've got to overcome that, and that's why we have to. No. By having delays, we may have actually evolved, having natural selection may have selected for us to have longer delays. Because by having longer delays, as long as we can compensate for it and create a perception of what the next moment will look like, as long as we can extrapolate appropriately, well, then we have more time to build interesting perceptions. Having rich perceptions with all of this stuff, all of this detail. If the universe was completely unpredictable, our motions within it were just ran at all times, and maybe I could only predict 1 millisecond into the future, in which case I would have to generate my perception within a millisecond. It would have no richness. It might just have like 4 pixels, because there's just no time. I got to get the stuff out there immediately. But it turns out the world is somewhat predictable, at least in the tenth of a second scale. And a tenth of a second suddenly buys us a lot of time to build complicated perceptions of the next moment. So the reason that we have the richness that we have is because the world is sufficiently predictable, or up to around tenth of a second scales. And whether it's a short latency or a short delay or a long delay, the fact that we're correcting for that delay and creating a perception of something that didn't get shown upon us, didn't get projected upon us, shows that we're in time with reality, because we ourselves are generating the perceptions that we see. And that, I think, changes how you think about your position and your placement within the universe and how you experience it. I talk about these things in Vision Revolution. This is a bestseller, a doubly bestseller in Japan, but it's also a bestseller here. You can get this, again, anywhere. And what we really need right now, coming out next week, Expressly Human. And that was your Science Moment.